All right, so this is your 1.6 solving other types of equations practice / quiz review. So pretty much anything on here is fair game for what you're going to see on this 1.6 quiz. For number 1, it gives you x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. Can you find factors of negative 12 that add up to be negative 1 in order to factor this?
Yes.
What are your factors of negative 12 that add up to be negative 1? Negative 4, positive 3. So this is going to factor to be x minus 4 times x plus 3 is equal to 0. From here, what are you going to do? Set each part equal to 0. So that's x minus 4 is equal to 0. X plus 3 is equal to 0. Solve for x for both of these. For the x minus 4 is equal to 0, what do you do? Add the 4 to each side to get x is equal to 4. For the x plus 3 is equal to 0, we move the 3 over by subtracting. So that's x is also equal to negative 3. For number 2, we have 2x squared plus 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. Do we have a greatest common factor that we can factor out first? We don't. We don't have anything that we can factor out. Just because that x squared has a 2 on it and that x has a 4 on it, that c term, that 1, would have to be a factor or a multiple of 2 in order for you to factor out a greatest common factor. So since it's not, we're going to leave it the way it is and just factor it by multiplying your a and your c term because a is something other than 1. So 2 times 1 gives us 2. What are our factors of 2 that add up to be 4? Are there anything? No, there's not. So from here, you're going to find out your A, your B, and your C, and use your quadratic formula. So remember your quadratic formula, x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So this is going to give us x is equal to the opposite of b, so that's the opposite of 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 1, all over 2 times a, so 2 times 2. The opposite of 4 is just negative 4. Plus or minus the square root of 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 2 times 1, which is 8, or negative 8, all over 2 times 2, which is 4. That 6 minus 8 gives us what? Sorry, 16. 16 minus 8 is 8, all over 4. What is the square root of 8? 8 is 2 and 4. 4 is 2 and 2. Your two 2's pair up, so that's negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 2 all over 4. Do you have a common factor between the negative 4, the 2 square root 2, and the 4? 2. So divide all of them by 2. The 4 on the bottom becomes 2. The negative 4 up top becomes negative 2. And the 2 square root 2 just is the square root of 2. So this gives us negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 all over 2. For number 3, we have x to the 4th power minus 3x squared plus 2 is equal to 0. Can you factor this one?
Yes.
Even though there's an x to the 4th power?
I don't know that.
You can. So the reason why you can is because, yes, you have x to the 4th power on your first term, but that middle term is x squared. So it's okay, because if you were to factor it and you were to FOIL it out, it'll end up giving you that x squared for that middle term, and then x to the 4th as the first term. So you're fine. So from here, find the factors of 2, positive 2, that add up to be negative 3. Negative 2 and negative 1. So because this is x to the 4th power, it's going to factor out to be x squared minus 2 times x squared minus 1 is equal to 0. Can you still factor any of these?
No. Well, yes.
X squared minus 1x squared plus 1.
Right, that x squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. So this factors further to be x squared minus 2 times x minus 1 times x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now that this is completely factored, set each part equal to 0 and solve for each of them. So you're going to have x squared minus 2 is equal to 0, x minus 1 is equal to 0, and x plus 1 is equal to 0. For the x squared minus 2 is equal to 0, what are you moving over? So add the 2 to both sides. This gives you x squared is equal to 2. From here, square root both sides. Make sure you put the plus or minus in front of your answer. So x is plus or minus the square root of 2. That's 2 of your answers. For the x minus 1 is equal to 0, what do you do to move the 1 over? Add it. So that's x is equal to positive 1. And then the x plus 1 is equal to 0. Subtract that 1 from each side to get x is also equal to negative 1. For one like this, you have 4 solutions. The positive square root 2, the negative square root 2, the positive 1, and the negative 1. For number 4, we are given x squared minus 9x plus 14 is equal to 0. What are your factors of positive 14 that add up to be a negative 9? Negative 2 and negative 7. So this factors to be x minus 2 times x minus 7 is equal to 0. Now that this is factored, is it factored completely? Yes, it is. Set each part equal to 0 then. So x minus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 7 is equal to 0. For the x minus 2 is equal to 0, what are you going to do? Add it to both sides, right? So that gives you x is equal to 2. For the x minus 7 is equal to 0, what do we do? So x is also positive 7. For number 5, we have x squared plus 24x plus 144 is equal to 0. What do you see about this that's kind of not odd, but would be able to help us? The 24 is divisible by 12 and the 144 is divisible by 12. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
12 squared is also 144.
Well, the 12 squared is 144. X squared is x squared. So this may be a perfect square trinomial. If you take the square root of x squared, that's x. If you take the square root of the 144, that's 12. The sign in the middle on the middle term is positive, so if we do 2 times x times 12, does that give us the 24x?
Yeah.
It does. So this is definitely a perfect square trinomial, which means we can take that x, we can take that 12, set it equal to 0. The sign that goes between is the sign that's on the middle term, which is positive, and then just raise the binomial to 2. From there, if you want to separate it to where it's x plus 2 times x plus 2 is equal to 0, you can do that. That's fine. If you don't want to, you don't have to. You would have this set equal to 0, so the only thing you'd have to do is take the square root of both sides. So this is going to give you x plus 12 is equal to the square root of 0, which is just 0. 0 is neither positive nor negative, which is why the plus or minus does not go in front of it. From there, move the 12 over, subtract it from each side, and you just have that x is equal to negative 12.
But if you did it the other way, you wouldn't need to write negative 12 twice.
If you did it to where you separated the x
Yeah.
plus 12 squared to be x plus 12 times x plus 12 is equal to 0, you would have still gotten that x is equal to negative 12 for both.
Yeah.
And you just have to give that once. You don't have to give it twice. For example 6, we have 2x squared plus x is equal to 1. Are all of the terms that we have on the same side of the equal sign? No. So start this one by moving that 1 over. So we'll subtract it from each side. It doesn't have a like term on the left side, so we're going to write it as 2x squared plus x minus 1 is equal to 0. Your a is something other than 1. So multiply your a times your c. So 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Do we have factors of negative 2 that add up to be a positive 1 to give us that 1x? What is it?
Oh, no.
2 and negative 1. So positive 2, negative 1, give us 1. So this is going to become 2x squared plus 2x minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. From here, you have 4 terms, so factor by grouping. Put a set of parentheses around the first 2, put a set around the last 2. Factor out a 2x from the first, factor out a negative 1 from the last. This is going to give us 2x times x plus 1 minus 1 times x plus 1 is equal to 0. Your 2 sets of parentheses are the same, so you can rewrite them once and form another out of that 2x and that negative 1 that you factored out from both sets of parentheses. From here, you're completely factored, so set each part equal to 0. You're going to have x plus 1 is equal to 0, and 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. For the x plus 1 is equal to 0, what are we going to do to get x by itself? Subtract 1 from each side, so x is negative 1. For the 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, add your 1 to both sides, you get 2x is equal to 1. Then divide each side by the 2, so x is 1/2. So again, 2 solutions for this one, the negative 1 and the positive 1/2. For number 7, we have 3x squared plus 5x minus 2 is equal to 0. We don't have a greatest common factor. We have an a that's something other than 1. Multiply your a and your c. 3 times negative 2 gives us negative 6. Are there factors of negative 6 that add up to be positive 5? Six and negative 1. So we're going to rewrite this as 3x squared plus 6x minus x minus 2 is equal to 0. We're going to factor by grouping. The first set of parentheses, we have a 3x, that's our greatest common factor, so we'll factor that out. The negative x minus 2, we have a negative 1, that's our greatest common factor. So this is going to give us 3x times x plus 2 minus 1 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. This is going to give us x plus 2 times 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. So from here, we're going to set each part equal to 0 and solve. So x plus 2 is equal to 0. 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. Subtract your 2 from each side. You get x is equal to negative 2. Add your 1 to both sides. You have 3x is equal to 1. Then divide each side by the 3. And you get that x is also 1/3. So negative 2 and positive 1/3 for your answers. For number 8, we have 4x cubed minus 25x is equal to 0. Do we have a greatest common factor that we can factor out first here? X. So we're going to divide everything by x. This is going to give us x times 4x squared minus 25 is equal to 0. Can we factor that binomial? Can you take the square root of the first term?
Yeah.
Can you take the square root of the second term?
Yes.
Are they separated by subtraction?
Yes.
So this is the difference of squares. Okay. So this factors out to be x times 2x minus 5 times 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. We're completely factored here, so set each part equal to 0. So x is equal to 0, 2x minus 5 is equal to 0, and 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. For the x is equal to 0, that's a solution. You have x by itself, give that as a solution. For the 2x minus 5 is equal to 0, add your 5 to both sides. You have 2x is equal to 5. Then divide each side by the 2. So x is equal to 5 over 2. For the 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. Subtract your 5 from each side. You have 2x is equal to negative 5. Then divide each side by the 2. So you get that x is also negative 5 over 2. So 3 solutions here. 0, negative 5 over 2, and positive 5 over 2. For number 9, you have x cubed minus 2x squared minus 5x plus 10 is equal to 0. You have 4 terms here, so factor it by grouping. We're going to group the first 2. We're going to group the last 2. Between the x cubed minus 2x squared, what's our greatest common factor?
X squared.
Between the negative 5x and the 10, what's our greatest common factor? Negative 5. So this gives us x squared times x minus 2 minus 5 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. From here, this is going to give us x squared minus 5 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. Can we factor any further with this? Look at the x squared minus 5. Do you have a difference of squares? You do not, because that 5 is not a perfect square. So you cannot factor any further. Set each part equal to 0. So x squared minus 5 is equal to 0, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. For the x squared minus 5 is equal to 0, add your 5 to both sides. You have x squared is equal to 5. Then take the square root of both sides. So you have that x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. For the x minus 2 is equal to 0, add your 2 to both sides, and you have that x is also equal to 2. So 3 solutions here, the positive square root 5, the negative square root 5, and the 2. All right, so for number 10, we have x squared minus 3x plus 9 is equal to 0. Do we have factors of 9 that add up to be negative 3? No. So how are you going to solve this? Okay, if you use your quadratic, what's your A?
Wait, question.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't x squared a 9?
You can take the square root of both. However, can you do a negative 2, since the middle term is negative, times x times 3 and get negative 3x? No, it's negative 6x. So it's not a perfect square trinomial. Just because you can take the square root of both your first term and your last term doesn't mean you have a perfect square trinomial. The only time that it is a perfect square trinomial is if you can take the square root of both the last and the first term and multiply it by a 2 or a negative 2, and it gives you that middle term. So in this case, it doesn't work, so you can't use that method. So your A here is 1, your B is negative 3, and your C is 9. So again, we're going to use the quadratic formula, that opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So that's going to give us x is equal to the opposite of negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 9, all over 2 times A, so 2 times 1. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3, plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, times 9 is negative 36, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. 9 minus 36 gives us what?
Negative 47.
So we have 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 27 all over 2. What do you have to do when there's a negative in the radical?
Well, first you can break it down, right?
Well, yes, you can break it down, but simplify that negative inside first.
Take it out.
Take it out, which it becomes
An
an I. Now that 27 is what times what?
9 times 3.
And 9 is?
3 times 2.
So your 2 3's pair up. This gives us 3 plus or minus 3i square root 3 all over 2. Can you simplify this any further?
No.
No. The reason why you cannot is because the 3i square root 3, and the 2 do not share a common factor other than 1. Let's say it was 3 plus or minus 3i square root 3 all over 6. Then you can simplify by dividing each of those terms by 3. For number 11, we have x to the 4th power minus 8x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. We can do this even though it's at x to the 4th power. Your factors of negative 9 that added to be negative 8 are what and what? One and negative 9 give us negative 8. So this is going to factor to be x squared plus 1 times x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. In this case, if you have a binomial that's a difference of squares like you do with that x squared minus 9, you don't necessarily need to separate it. If you realize that it's a difference of squares and you set it equal to 0 when you separate all of that, that's fine. So this could be given, or you could from here have x squared plus 1 is equal to 0, as well as x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. Get the x squared by itself, take the square root of both sides. If you get the x squared by itself with the x squared plus 1 is equal to 0, we're going to subtract 1 from each side, get x squared is equal to negative 1. From here, just take the square root of both sides. Make sure you put the plus or minus in front of it. So x is equal to plus or minus what? What's the square root of negative 1? I. So it's just plus or minus I. That's part of your answer. It's half of them. For the x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. Move your 9 over, add it to both sides. You have x squared is equal to 9. Take the square root of both sides. Make sure you put the plus or minus in front of your answer. And you have x is equal to plus or minus 3 as well. So you have that plus or minus I and that plus or minus 3. For number 12, we have x squared minus 4x is equal to 0. For this one, you don't have a c term. Since you do not have a c term, what is your c term? 0. So the only way that you could do this one is identify your a, which is 1, b, which is negative 4, c, which is 0. Use your quadratic formula. Okay? You can do that. You could also say to yourself, you have a greatest common factor of x. Factor out the x. That would give you x times x minus 4 is equal to 0. If you think that's easier, do it that way also. So this type of question kind of confuses some of you, which is perfectly normal, which is why I started with your quadratic formula. If you were to use that, you have to identify c as 0. You can use it. You're still going to get the same answer. But like I said, you have to identify that your c is 0. If you don't use the quadratic formula, you can just factor out the greatest common factor, which we did here in that orange. So x times x minus 4 is equal to 0. Now that it's factored, set each part equal to 0 and solve. So x is equal to 0. X minus 4 is equal to 0. Add your 4 to both sides, and you have your two answers of x is equal to 0. X is equal to 0, and x is equal to 4. If you were to use the quadratic formula that negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, you'd have x is equal to the opposite of negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 0 all over 2 times 1. So that opposite of negative 4 is positive 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 1 times 0 all becomes minus 0. All over 2 times 1 is 2. The 16 minus 0 is just the square root of 16. So that's 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 over 2. What is the square root of 16? 4. So you have x is equal to 4 plus or minus 4 over 2. Separate this into two things. You have x is equal to 4 minus 4 over 2. And x is equal to 4 plus 4 over 2. The 4 minus 4 is 0 over 2, which gives you x is 0. The 4 plus 4 is 8 over 2. So that's where your 4 comes from. So same answers, just a different way of doing it. For number 13, you have x squared minus 4x is equal to x plus 6. You have an x squared here, so get everything on the same side as that equal sign. Or sorry, as that x squared. So with that x, we're going to move that over. So we'll subtract it from each side. It's going to give us x squared minus 5x is equal to 6. And then that 6 will move over. We'll subtract it from each side. So we're working with x squared minus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. Do we have factors of negative 6 that add up to be negative 5?
Negative 6.
Negative 6 and positive 1, right? So this factors out to be x plus 1 times x minus 6 is equal to 0. From here, remember, we set each part equal to 0 and we solve. So it's going to be x plus 1 is equal to 0 and x minus 6 is equal to 0. For the x plus 1 is equal to 0, subtract your 1 from each side. You have that x is negative 1. For the x minus 6 is equal to 0, add your 6 to both sides, and you have that x is also 6. So your two solutions are negative 1 and 6. For number 14, we have x squared minus 4x is equal to 2x plus 7. So again, we're going to move the 2x over and the 7 over. For the 2x, we're going to subtract it from each side. This is going to give us x squared minus 6x is equal to 7. Then we'll just subtract the 7 from each side. And we have x squared minus 6x minus 7 is equal to 0. Your factors of negative 7 that add up to be negative 6 are what and what? 1 and negative 7. So this factors to be x plus 1 times x minus 7 is equal to 0. So this one is just like the one we just did on number 13. We'll set each of these equal to 0. And we'll solve for both. We'll subtract that 1 from each side. So x is negative 1. And we'll add that 7 to each side. And get that x is also positive 7. For number 15, you have x to the 4th power minus 9x squared is equal to x minus 9. Do yourselves a favor, change that x to the 4th power to x cubed, and then this will actually work out. So with this one, you would move the x minus 9 over to the other side. You could also factor out an x and then divide each side by the x minus 9. It's two different ways of doing it.
How did we change it to x to the third?
It was written wrong.
Oh.
Yeah, it was supposed to be x cubed minus 9x squared is equal to x minus 9.
Are they all going to be like that? Or
What do you mean?
like?
It was a typo in the actual
Oh.
file that was uploaded. That's all.
Okay.
Okay? That's why I was saying change that x to the 4th to x cubed. Because, like I said, it was just a typo. All right. So with this, we're going to move the x over. So we'll subtract it from each side. This gives us x cubed minus 9x squared minus x is equal to negative 9. Then we will add the 9 to both sides. So this gives you x cubed minus 9x squared minus x plus 9 is equal to 0. From here, you can factor that left side by grouping. So we'll put a set around the first two, put a set around the last two, factor out an x squared from the first, factor out a negative 1 from the second. So this gives us x squared times x minus 9 minus 1 times x minus 9 is equal to 0. Your two sets of parentheses are the same. So we're going to rewrite this as x squared minus 1 times x minus 9 is equal to 0. That x squared minus 1, it is not factored all the way, so you need to factor it completely. What is it going to become? What is it? It's a difference of squares, so what does it factor out to be?
X plus 1 and x minus 1.
Good. So now that you're completely factored, set each part equal to 0 and solve each part. So you're going to have x minus 1 is equal to 0, x plus 1 is equal to 0, and x minus 9 is equal to 0. For the x minus 1, add the 1 to both sides. You get x is positive 1. For the x plus 1, subtract the 1 from each side. You have x is negative 1. And then for the x minus 9, add the 9 to both sides, and you get that x is also positive 9. So plus or minus 1 and 9 for your answers. If we look at number 16, we have x squared plus 16 is equal to 0. For this one, you cannot factor it, but you do have an x squared and no other x term within the equation. So get your x squared by itself. Move the 16 over. We're going to subtract it from each side. So this is x squared is equal to negative 16. From here, you can take the square root of both sides. You do have a negative underneath that radical, so make sure you pull that I out. So this becomes x is equal to plus or minus, the square root of 16 is 4i. For 17, we have x squared is equal to negative 12. This negative 12 is already on its own side, so it's x squared, so we can just take the square root of both sides. You need to simplify this square root of negative 12. Again, it's a negative, so pull that I out, make sure that plus or minus goes in front of it, and then take the square root of 12. 12 is what times what? 4 and 3. The 4 is 2 and 2. So those two 2's pair up. So this is going to become x is equal to plus or minus 2i square root 3. For number 18, we have x squared plus 6x plus 10 is equal to 0. You do not have factors of 10 that add up to be 6. So solve this using your quadratic formula. Everything is on the same side of that equal sign, and it's equal to 0. So you can identify your a, your b, and your c, and then just plug in your values and simplify into that quadratic formula. So starting off, your a is what? 1. B is, and c is. Remember, your quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So this is going to give us x is equal to the opposite of b, so that's the opposite of 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c, so minus 4 times 1 times 10, all over 2 times a, so 2 times 1. Underneath that radical, that 6 squared is
36.
negative 4 times 1 times 10,
40.
negative 40. All over 2 times 1 is? The 36 minus 40 gives us what? So that's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 all over 2. What is the square root of negative 4? So that's negative 6 plus or minus 2i all over 2. Does this simplify?
Yes.
Yes. The negative 6 is divisible by 2, which becomes plus or minus the 2i divided by 2 is I. So that's just negative 3 plus or minus I. For number 19, you have 2x squared minus 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. If you didn't even want to try to figure out if you can factor this, you can just use the quadratic formula. It's totally up to you. For this one, if you did 2 times 2, you got 4. You do not have factors of 4 that add up to be negative 3. So we're going to use the quadratic formula for this. Your a is 2, b is negative 3, c is 2. Again, we're going to use x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So this is going to give us x is equal to the opposite of b, so the opposite of negative 3, plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2 all over 2 times 2. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3, so that becomes 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 2 is negative 16, And this is all over 2 times 2, which is 4. That 9 minus 16 underneath the radical is going to give us what?
-7.
So the square root of -7. Can you simplify this?
Yes.
Why? How?
Because you can take the I out.
That negative. You cannot keep that negative underneath the radical, so this becomes x is equal to 3 plus or minus I square root 7 all over 4. For number 20, you have x to the 4th power minus 256 is equal to 0. You can either factor this, or you can solve it by moving that 256 over and then taking the 4th root of each side. I find it easier to find the 4th root of each side rather than factoring it, because off the top of my head, I don't know exactly if the 2 to the 256 is a perfect square. So if I move that 256 over, I'm going to add it to both sides. This is going to give us x to the 4th power is equal to 256. From here, we're going to take the 4th root of each side, so we get x, not x to the 4th. So we'll take the 4th root of x to the 4th as well as the 256. The 4th root of x to the 4th is just x. The 4th root of 256. Find the prime factorization of it. What goes into both what goes into 256 evenly?
4 times 4 times 4.
12.
Okay, so if we did 4 times what is 20, or 25 divided by 4 is what? 6, with a 1 left over. So then that's 16. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. The 64 is what times what? 8 and 8. The 4 is a perfect square, which is 2 and 2. So if we do 2 times 8, that gives us 16. So x is just equal to plus or minus 16. Okay, so 4th root, not square root. This would end up being, hold on. Let's not circle those. Okay, so the 8s then would become 4 and 2. The 8 is 2 and 4. The 4 is 2 and 2. So we're looking at groups of 4. Sorry, guys. So this is a group of 4. This is a group of 4. So 2 times 2. So x is just plus or minus 2 times 2 is 4. Sorry about that. For 21, we have x cubed minus 2x squared plus 4x minus 8 is equal to 0. All of your terms are on the same side. You do not have a greatest common factor from all 4 of those terms, but there are 4 terms, so factor by grouping. If we put a set of parentheses around the first 2 terms and a set of parentheses around the last 2 terms, what is our greatest common factor between the x cubed and the 2x squared? X squared. What's our greatest common factor between the 4x and the 8? So this is going to give us x squared times x minus 2 plus 4 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. This then becomes x squared plus 4 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. Can you factor this any further?
Yeah.
How?
That's squared plus 4.
That's not a difference of squares.
Oh, no.
So you cannot factor this any further. Set each part equal to 0. You have x squared plus 4 is equal to 0, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. Solve them both. For the x squared plus 4 is equal to 0, subtract your 4 from each side, and solve the x squared is equal to negative 4. Take your square root of both sides. You cannot have that negative underneath, so this is plus or minus 2i. For the x minus 2 is equal to 0, add your 2 to both sides, and you get that x is also positive 2. So you have plus or minus 2i and just 2. For 22, we have 3x squared plus 4x minus 1 is equal to 0. If you multiply the 3 times the negative 1, you get negative 3. Are there any factors of negative 3 that add up to be 4? No. So use your quadratic formula with this. Your a is 3, B is, and C is -1. So plug this into your quadratic formula. You're going to have x is equal to the opposite of 4, so -4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times -1 all over 2 times 3. So this simplifies to be -4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 12 all over 6. The 16 plus 12 gives us,
28.
so -4 plus or minus the square root of 28 all over 6. That 28 is 4 and 7. The 4 is 2 and 2. So those two 2's pair up, so you get x is equal to -4 plus or minus 2 square root 7 all over 6. Can this be simplified? Yes. The -4, the 2 square root 7, and the 6 are all divisible by 2. So that -4 is going to become a -2, the 2 becomes 1, and the 6 becomes 3, to give us x is equal to -3 plus or minus 1 square root 7, so that's just the square root of 7, over 3. This 3 that's on top should be a 2. This should be a -2, sorry guys. So -2 plus or minus the square root of 7 all over 3. For 23, you have 3 minus the square root of x minus 3 is equal to x. You have to first isolate the radical with these types of equations. So we're going to move the 3 over, then we're going to divide each side by that negative. So to move the 3 over, we subtract it from each side. This is going to give us the opposite of the square root of x minus 3 is equal to x minus 3. From here, divide each side by that -1. So this is going to give us the square root of x minus 3 is equal to -x plus 3. In order to get rid of that radical, square both sides. It has an index of 2, so raise each side to the power of 2. This cancels out the radical on the left side to leave you with x minus 3. That -x plus 3 times -x plus 3 is what you'll do there. So -x times -x is positive x squared. -x times 3 is -3x. 3 times -x is -3x. And 3 times 3 is 9. You combine your like terms on that right side, and it becomes x minus 3 is equal to x squared minus 6x plus 9. Move your x and your 3 to the other side of this equation in order to solve it. It's got to be equal to 0. So subtract the x from each side, add the 3 to both sides. This is going to give you x squared minus 7x plus 12 is equal to 0. Do you have do you have factors of positive 12 that add up to be -7? -4, -3. So this factors out to give you x minus 3 times x minus 4 is equal to 0. Set them both equal to 0 and solve. You're going to move the 3 over by adding it to both sides. So you get x is 3. Move the 4 over by adding it to both sides. You get x is 4. So two answers, 3 and 4. For number 24, we have 1 over x plus 2 over x minus 1 is equal to 3. What is your least common denominator out of these two fractions? Times x minus 1. Okay, so multiply every single term by this x times x minus 1. So we're going to do x times x minus 1 times 1 over x, then x times x minus 1 times 2 over x minus 1, and then x times x minus 1 times 3. For the x times x minus 1 times 1 over x, what is the same that can cancel out? The x on the denominator and the x by itself here. So it's just 1 times x minus 1. for the x times x minus 1 times 2 over x minus 1. What is the same that can cancel out?
X minus 1.
The x minus 1s. So that's just x times 2 or 2 times x. Then you have x times x minus 1 times 3. If you want to multiply the x and the 3 first, you get 3x, and you still have to multiply that by the x minus 1. If we multiply from here, the 1 times x minus 1 is just x minus 1. The 2 times x is 2x. And the 3x distributed in becomes 3x squared minus 3x. You have an x squared here. So when you combine like terms on that left side with the x and the 2x to give you 3x minus 1 is equal to 3x squared minus 3x, you are going to get all of your terms on the same side of that equal sign because the x squared is there. Now, when you do this, you are going to subtract that 3x over to be on the right side of that equation. So you subtract it from the 3x on the right side. You also add that 1 over. It does not combine with another like term on that right side. So this is going to give you 3x squared minus 6x plus 1 is equal to 0. Do you have factors of 3 times 1 that add up to be negative 6? No. 3 times 1 is 3. There's no factors that add up to be negative 6 there. So you can use the quadratic formula in order to solve this. Your A is 3, B is negative 6, C is 1. So using your quadratic formula, and we're going to have x is equal to the opposite of negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1 all over 2 times 3. The opposite of negative 6 becomes positive 6. Plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared is 36. The negative 4 times 3 times 1 is negative 12. And that's all over 6. The 36 minus 12 gives us 24. The square root of 24. 24 is 4 times 6. 4 is 2 and 2. 6 is 2 and 3. 2 of those 2's pair up. So this is x is equal to 6 plus or minus 2 square root 3 all over 6. Does this simplify?
Yes.
How does it simplify?
Divided by 2.
Divide everything by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 square root 3 divided by 2 is just the square root of 3. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that's 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 all over 3. For 25, we have x over x minus 2 plus 1 over x plus 2 is equal to 8 over x squared minus 4. If I were you, I would rewrite this to where that 8 is over x minus 2 times x plus 2. Because that x squared minus 4 factors to be a difference of squares. So x minus 2 times x plus 2. What is your least common denominator out of all three of these fractions?
X minus
X.
2. And
X plus 2.
Okay, so we're going to multiply every single term here by that x minus 2 times x plus 2. If you want to, you can do it here to where you have this x minus 2 times x plus 2, x minus 2 times x plus 2, x minus 2 times x plus 2. So on the first one, that x over x minus 2, what is the same when you multiply that by your least common denominator? The x minus 2's. So that's just x times x plus 2. For the 1 over x plus 2 times your least common denominator, what is the same?
The x plus 2.
The x plus 2, so those cancel. So it's just 1 times x minus 2. And then the 8 over x minus 2 times x plus 2 times the least common denominator, what's the same? All of it. So they all cancel out, and it's just the numerator. So from here, distribute in the x X times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. Distribute in the 1. 1 times x is x. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Combine your like terms on the left side. The 2x plus x gives us, so that's x squared plus 3x minus 2 is equal to 8. This is not equal to 0. You need it equal to 0. So subtract the 8 from each side. You get x squared plus 3x minus 10 is equal to 0. Why is it negative 2? Because 1 times negative 2 is negative 2?
Wait, what?
Did you ask what? Huh? From here? Did you say why is it negative 2 or is it 3 and negative 2?
No, I just said 5 and negative 2.
Oh, 5. I'm sorry. I thought you said why is it negative 2? I'm so sorry. Okay, so your factors of negative 10 that add up to be 3 are 5 and negative 2. So this factors out to be x plus 5 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. From here, what do you do?
Oh, but you said it equal to 0.
So x plus 5 is equal to 0 and x minus 2 is equal to 0.
And you get negative 5.
Good. So we move that 5 over by subtracting. You get x is equal to negative 5. Move the 2 over by adding it. You get x is equal to 2. All right, so for number 26, we have the square root of x plus 4 is equal to x squared minus 5. Is your radical isolated?
Yeah.
Yes. So raise each side to the power of its index. We're working with the square root, so its index is automatically a 2. We'll square both sides here. Remember when you do this, yes, your radical cancels out with that power, so you just have x plus 4 on the left side. However, that x squared minus 5 squared is x squared minus 5 times x squared minus 5. There's so many of you that distribute in that power to each of the terms and do x squared squared minus 5 squared, and that's not the same thing. You gotta multiply it out, FOIL it out. Okay, so on that right side, that x squared times x squared is x to the 4th. X squared times negative 5 is negative 5x squared. Negative 5 times x squared is negative 5x squared. And negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. From here, you have like terms on the right side, so combine those x squared. You have x plus 4 is equal to x to the 4th power minus 10x squared plus 25. From here, move the x over, move the 4 over. So if we move the x over, we subtract it from each side. If we move the 4 over, we subtract that from each side. We do not have an x, that's just an x on that right side, so it's going to become x to the 4th power minus 10x squared minus x plus 21 is equal to 0. Do you have a common factor here? No. Since you do not have a common factor here, try to factor this by grouping. If you if you put a set of parentheses around the first two and a set around the last two, your greatest common factor from the first two is just x squared. Greatest common factor from the last two is just negative 1. So this will become x squared times x squared minus 10 minus 1 times x minus 21 is equal to 0. Can you factor this? No. So there's just no solution. Okay. So if we had left that, I think it was number 15, like x to the 4th power,
That's it.
it would end up being the same exact type of problem as this.